Okay, shall we get started, gang?
Absolutely.
Hello and welcome to this live session, everyone. I'm Will Seitz, Director of Sales for the Americas with G2 Risk Solutions. As you can see from the title, we're here to talk about the challenges with staying in card brand compliance. We estimate this session will run about 45 minutes. For those who have been around a while, I'd like to give a quick reminder that in January, we and our sister companies, LCI and Fintelix, joined under a master new brand. So the name you'll hear going forward is G2 Risk Solutions, and you may hear me use the acronym G2RS. For those new to the industry, G2 is a leader in providing merchant lifecycle solutions for acquirers, ISOs, and PayFacs all throughout multiple levels within the payments ecosystem. Before we start this discussion, let's do some quick housekeeping and introductions. First, this is a brief disclaimer and liability waiver from the legal team. As you might expect, the information in this presentation is general information only and is not professional or legal advice. If needed, please seek out independent professional advice relevant to your own particular circumstances. And finally, G2 Risk Solutions is not liable or responsible for any injury, loss, or damage of any nature incurred by using the information in this presentation. And now on to a few housekeeping items. Please submit questions anytime throughout the session using the GoToWebinar questions panel, and we'll answer them at the end. Moving on, if you'd like a copy of this deck, it's available by clicking into the GoToWebinar handouts sections. You'll find it there with information on some of our solutions. Finally, this session is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent in a follow-up email from our marketing team, and you will also be able to find it on the G2 Risk Solutions website. And now with that, let's move on to some introductions. Again, my name is Will Seitz. I'm the Director of Sales for the Americas here at G2 Risk Solutions. Today, we are extremely lucky to have two very senior industry veterans with us. Both are members of the Board of Association of Payments Professionals, and I think I speak for all of us on the panel, encouraging all of you listening today to become a member of the Association of Payment Professionals. Please reach out to myself, Shari, or David if you have any questions about membership. Firstly, let me introduce Shari Savlik. Shari has 23 years industry experience, 19 with Merrick Bank on the acquiring side, heading the merchant compliance department. She is responsible for regulatory merchant compliance and operational integrity for the merchant services business unit out of Merrick Bank. She has also been a member of the Association of Payment Professionals, formerly known as MAC, for the last 15 years, and she is currently serving as the president of the board at APP. Shari has extensive experience in matters related to regulatory compliance, PCI DSS compliance, underwriting and risk analysis of registered high-risk merchants, third-party diligence, oversight and registration requirements, project management, Section 6050W of the IRS Code, data integrity, CPP/breach, and suspected breach events, and enterprise risk management. On to David Press. David, with over 30 years of experience in the bank card industry, David is a seasoned leader and strategist in card brand compliance, risk management, fraud detection, dispute resolution, and operational assessment. He has a proven track record of building and maintaining strong relationships with card brands, customers, service providers, and regulators, as well as delivering innovative and effective solutions to complex and dynamic challenges. In his current role as the global head of card brand relationships and card brand compliance at PaySafe, he oversees and directs a global team responsible for ensuring compliance with all card brand requirements and standards, as well as providing expert guidance and support to the PaySafe divisions. Thank you both very much for joining us today. And now I've certainly had enough talking today. Let's jump into this discussion. And I think I'm going to open this up to both of you. Is your merchant portfolio truly in card brand compliance, and how do you know?
That's a good question, Will, and it's kind of a loaded question because it really depends on, when you're talking about a merchant portfolio, are you talking about the merchants within a portfolio, or are you talking about the third party, like the ISO or the payment facilitator? So it does kind of change the narrative a little bit. And I think you can really break that down into 7 categories. You have the regulatory environment, which is really important to understand the regulatory landscape specific to the region that the business is operating in. So we'll call it an ISO for these purposes. And the regulations related to payment processing can vary significantly from country to country or even between states within the US. And then you have your card brand requirements, which I can't emphasize enough the importance to understand and be aware of the card brand rules, but also to make sure that you're aware that the payment network rules change every 6 months. So be aware of what that looks like. Sponsorship and relationship with banks. So in the US, you do need to have a sponsor bank as part of that relationship who is a member of Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover. Risk management and fraud prevention, compliance certification, contractual agreements, and training and education. Those would be the 7 categories that you really need to focus on, in my opinion, to know if a third party or a merchant portfolio as a whole is truly in compliance.
Yeah, and I also think that, Sherry, to expand on some of those points, those areas of compliancy shift as risk tolerances shift and as interpretation of rules shift. The card brand rules are written vaguely for a reason. They are always open to interpretation. And the interpretation today is maybe not the interpretation tomorrow, next week, next month. It really all depends on who is looking at those rules and which brand it is. And how do you walk in, as we've discussed before, in this big gray area between the boundaries, and the boundaries being in compliance and out of compliance. So I really think that, looking at your portfolio, understanding what makes up that portfolio, not just MCC wise, but risk tolerance wise, and what is the, what are the brands looking at for what's on their radar right now. So really, those are some of the things that I would add for sure on those.
I would agree with you, David, and I would even go a step further and say that it's not just awareness of the payment network rules. Rules are not laws. Rules are rules, but there are laws, and you are required to comply with all of those things simultaneously. So it's really important to understand that, especially when there's some perceived conflict between them. It's important that you comply with all.
Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the topics that we had at the APP last week, was the paradoxes of how do you navigate federal law, state law, card brand law, country law, and walk that tightrope, especially in some of the states that are, let's say, more aggressive in how they look at specific areas. For example, the new firearm MCC that's coming out, and enforcement. How is that going to work? Is it going to be the state where the purchaser lives, or where it's actually purchased from, or where the store look? So there's a lot of moving parts, and that's really the key, as Sherry said, is you have to be on your toes all the time. There is no time to rest. When you rest, that's when you hear that soft little ticking sound in your ear, and every portfolio has them. It's just a matter of can you pull the pin before it goes off.
For sure. And it sort of begs the question, just because it's legal, does that mean you have to do it? No, it really doesn't. And really think about that before you engage.
100%. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. 100%.
And there's there could be large, with large risk comes large reward, but also can come large assessments and reputational hits, being on the card brand's radar, which are all things that, it's great to make money until you're not. It's great to make money until the brands are assessing you. And as most people understand, the relationship between the brands and the parties and the customers. So there's two types of customers. There are customers with a capital C, and those are customers that have the direct relationship with the brands. So the acquirers, let's say here in the U.S., or direct customers, capital C, outside of the U.S. Then there are third parties who are also customers, but they're small c. And what I mean by that is they don't have a direct line of sight to the card brands. So not only do they have to be compliant because they can put their sponsoring bank in the trick bag with the brands by doing something and circumventing the processes that the customers, capital C, direct customers have. So it's really incumbent on both areas to have good processes in place and people that understand how the landscape shifts.
Yes, definitely. And making sure that at every point in the transaction, because there's going to be a lot of players, you mentioned third parties. What's a third party? There's a question that's bigger than a bread box, right? That's your gateways, your shopping carts, your ISVs, your key pin injection things, right? It could be anything. So the really important thing there is to have risk management, fraud prevention, and compliance certification. I can't stress that enough. Do your diligence, know who you're working with, and know who your customers are working with. It's really important to understand that anyone who is part of that payment channel and directly involved in the payment processing is validated PCI compliant. But even outside of that, anyone who has data, you want to make sure that they're SOC compliant. How are they protecting PII and NPPI? It's not just PAN that we're worried about. So it's really about compliance certification, risk management, and fraud prevention to make sure that you are being proactive and not solely reactive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a constant thing. It's not something you just do, say, okay, we're good, and then put on a shelf. You have to have that oversight. When I was at the brand and would go out and see acquirers, what I would tell them is they need to have active oversight. And what I mean by that is you can't just have third-party entities doing everything and sitting back and just collecting the money and not monitoring transaction activity, not taking a percentage of the daily deals that are coming in, the MPAs or merchant processing agreements that are coming in, and doing some concurrence on it. So it had to be active. And the ones that were active, that had this active engagement, were the ones that had less issues. The ones that were more passive were the ones that didn't really understand what was in their portfolio. And until something would happen, right? There would be a violation letter sent by one of the card brands. And then all of a sudden they're scrambling because they're trying to figure out, oh my God, how did this happen? Well, you shouldn't really have too many oh my God moments if you are properly managing your compliancy through all the life cycle and through all of your partners.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, David. I think it's really important to have the mindset that compliance is not a finish line to cross. It's a way of business that needs to be led. It's ongoing. And changing, as the rules and laws change, the payment ecosystem is forever evolving. And I think we all know that fraud moves faster than risk. It always has. That's historic. So we have to make sure that we remain absolutely vigilant about staying up to date with our monitoring and our fraud prevention, to make sure that we understand what is happening and where it's happening so that we can be quicker and more nimble.
And
100%.
Sean, this is a great segue into the next topic for conversation. You kind of touched a little bit on it, but I think, to hear you guys talk more about what are the challenges, and generally speaking, what do you see as the challenges and pitfalls of running and maintaining payments business?
Don't look down.
Yeah, that's don't look down. And I think
Like
historically we can use PCI compliance as an example, just because it's an easy one. It's really not difficult to board all of your merchants into a portal and get them to validate compliance. But that compliance is a moment in time, and it's only good for a period of time. Where the struggle industry-wide is revalidation. It's getting those merchants re-engaged and getting them to revalidate and to maintain those best practices over time. And I think a lot of that comes down to training and education, is making sure that all of your third parties, whether they're ISOs or merchants or anything, encourage them to have that ongoing training and education, not just for their staff, but for any of the entities that they are engaged with, involved in that payment processing ecosystem with them, and make sure that they're knowledgeable about any relevant compliance changes or rules changes or laws that have changed. Because even in the high risk space, we're seeing changes happening, not just at the payment network rule level, but even at the state law level, where there are now, I think, 10 states now that require for adult content related merchants that the end user has to be age verified. It's not just the models anymore. Now it's the users too. And those laws vary state by state. So you need to make sure that your mitigating controls and monitoring touches that and covers that. You need to be watching for the most stringent of the rules and laws and making sure that you're staying up to date as they change.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that, entities have to understand that merchants are merchants. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're shop owners. They're not credit card experts. They use their processing to facilitate payment. So while you're able, Cherry's scenario, you're able to get that first time validation, PCI validation. But then afterwards, it gets a little more tenuous, a little more difficult. Explaining to them why they need to have, the certification every year. Oh my God, nothing's changed. Why do I have to do this every year? It's ridiculous. Usually the easiest thing to explain to them is reputational risk. So if you're not compliant and it gets out that your store was the common point of purchase or had an account data compromise, how would that affect your ability to do business in your community? So education is key, merchant education is key. And like I said, just, remembering that these merchants are not they don't sit on our side of the street, right? They're sitting on the other side of the street. And the more information you can give them, in very easily digestible bits, and over time, not just like loading them up saying, oh my God, you got 90 days to be compliant, 60 days to complete, like 30, and then wind up hitting them with some non-compliance fee and just saying, okay, we're going to charge you X amount of dollars per month. Instead of actually going through the process. I think it's really important to connect with those merchants.
For sure. And reminding those merchants too that payment network rules are publicly facing. Visa and MasterCard have public versions available to merchants. They should know these things, or at least familiarize themselves with the fact that they exist. Because even when we take it down away from, the high risk segment, right down to surcharging, there's absolutely payment network rules around surcharging, and they've changed recently. But there are so many merchants engaging in it and engaging in it incorrectly. Why? Because they don't know the difference between surcharging and cash discounting. And if anyone's looking for the payment network rules on cash discounting, they don't exist. because that is public law. That was federal, and it was enacted in 1981. But merchants don't know that. They're doing it because the guy down the street is doing it, and they really don't understand. They're trying to offset the cost of processing. If you need to offset the cost of processing that significantly, then maybe you shouldn't be processing credit cards in the first place. Are you processing enough at that point would be my question to you. But that's another one of those training and education, is that you have these rules available to you. And it's not just one little section of rules of, oh, surcharging is in this section of the Visa rules or this section of the MasterCard rules. You really want to be aware that there's authorization rules too that fall separate from surcharging but still apply. You can't assess a surcharge to a tip, for example, right? It has to be that authorization amount. So I think it's awareness and training and education are so critical, because there are just so many nuanced rules that merchants do need to be aware of to maintain compliance. And just because you are compliant for a moment in time doesn't mean you always will be. You can't become complacent.
Correct. And also making sure that, things like equipment is updated. You start a business in, let's say you started a new business after before the pandemic, and now you're at a point where the software isn't updatable. There's no updates, and it's expensive. Equipment is expensive, and a lot of store owners don't understand. Plus their vendors may not call them and say, "Hey, your equipment's outdated." You may only find out when the brand sends some kind of data integrity related issue, because not all of the information is being properly transmitted. So there's really a lot of areas that play a role. Education, being on top of things, equipment, etc. So you really have to stay hyper vigilant. That's the key, and not just rest on what happened yesterday. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And surround yourself with a team of really smart people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably the best way to combat this, is make sure that you have a good team.
Yeah. Have a good team that really understands all of the nuances of it, and how they relate to, payment network, merchant, compliancy, PCI, etc. Because each one of those, while they are all interconnected and you could connect the dots, they are all separate and all have levels of expertise that are needed in order to be proficient in those areas. There's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. I think, Sherry, you said that at the beginning. There is no magic silver bullet that fixes everything. You kind of got to put everything together depending on your individual risk tolerance, the level of compliancy, etc. So no two shops are going to be the same.
Exactly. And no one person could possibly know everything. I know I like to pretend I know everything, but I don't. And I have enough humility to recognize there's always the possibility I could be wrong. I mean, it's rare, but it happens. But I think it's so important to understand. If there's one thing that this industry has taught me, it's that the moment you think you understand it, something will change.
Yep.
Something 100%. Will change,
100%.
and it's going to change fast.
Well, I always say I know enough to be dangerous. I learn something new every day. And even though I've been doing this, a very, very long time, I don't know what I don't know. And then when I find out, it's like, wow, that's amazing. And that's really where surrounding yourself with amazing people and having a great team that just brings it every day. That's really, and I think it makes senior leadership job a lot easier when you have teams that make senior leadership look good. So
absolutely. And I think the other thing there too, when you're talking about the challenges of maintaining compliance, One of the challenges that I run into quite a bit overseeing a compliance department is that people are very eager to problem solve, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but make sure you understand the problem you need to solve for before you start throwing out solutions. If you don't understand what the problem is, then you're just throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which
Again,
I think
kind of getting in that gray area between the rails, right? So
well, speaking of being between the rails, yeah, how are you being proactive in finding and then managing those non-obvious red flags that you unfortunately hear from the card brands first before you're able to discuss with your merchants, your partners, your PayFacs, and who they are? Can you go into some detail about that process?
Yeah, how do you proactively find non-obvious red flags? Well, one of the best ways to do this is to solicit help, right? Hire an MMSP to help you monitor your merchant portfolios, because I think, like a G2RS, for example, make sure that you've got transaction laundering, that you are doing scrubs of the unknown universe, that you are monitoring websites that are higher risk, that you understand what these merchants are doing, not just at the moment you underwrote them, but that there's ongoing monitoring. And, having an MMSP available to help you do that type of monitoring will save you manpower and can go much deeper than a human can on their own. It'll save you operational capacity as well. You'll get further with less.
true. I agree as well. Using an MMSP, other tools that are available, really understanding your portfolio. There's no way that you can actively monitor all of the different categories that an MMSP can with regularity and with assurance. And the other side of it is, if your MMSP is registered with the brands, then you get mitigation, as was discussed last week, also at the conference. There is mitigation available. So while there are costs involved to do this, if there is an issue, you're going to get a portion of that. That assessment number is going to go down, and that's what you want. You don't want to have a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 assessment. It's a lot easier, to have no assessment, of course, would be great. But if you're going to get assessed, to have an assessment of a couple of $1,000s because you had an MMSP actively looking for, items like transaction laundering or illegal processing, etc. So 100% using those tools.
And detecting something like transaction laundering makes everyone better, because once transaction laundering is identified, there's a pattern and there's characteristics, and that will help you going forward as well, that you can now identify those characteristics if they present through another channel.
And David, you made a great point earlier too. The merchants, they often don't know, and they come to an acquiring bank as hey, we're selling X, and then I can make a lot more money if I sell Y, but then they don't tell their acquirer or whoever's responsible for this transaction. That makes leveraging a technology with MMSP even more important, because then they can alert you to that. And then you also have the guys that are trying to game the system, and they know they're not going to get transactional approval for selling Y. So they come to you guys selling X, and then having an MMSP to be able to detect where they're selling their Y products and being able to make that connection is hugely beneficial.
Oh, true. And I think that you also have to have a fairly aggressive periodic merchant review process in place across the board. Focusing on the merchants that have a higher risk factor, whatever those calculations are that you use for risk factors, because risk factors and risk tolerance and risk appetite are all different. You could take 10 different shops and put let's say 100 merchants in those 10 different shops, and you're going to have 10 different tolerance levels for those. But having some kind of aggressive periodic monitoring where you look through to see, hey, is it really still Dave's Auto Parts, or is now Dave selling auto parts and DVD and, you know, something else or something else? It's always better to find out on your own than to get the tap on the shoulder from somebody at the brand saying, hey, by the way, did you know your merchant is selling something that's illegal? So you having that process in place also is key. That's how I think you become proactive by doing
I
that.
would agree with that. Behavior monitoring is a big one,
Yes,
right? And I know,
yes.
David, you were talking about this where, you know, watch the transactions and does this make sense? We saw a lot of this during the pandemic when so many businesses
Absolutely.
were shutting down. We would monitor the volume of businesses, and it was like a bizarre social experiment where you could see liquor stores and adult merchants spike, and then you'd see veterinarians spike when everyone got their COVID puppy, right? And
Right.
grocery stores were doing phenomenally. But if a high-end luxury jewelry store was doing really well in, you know, May of 2020, I'm going to be scratching my head thinking, what is it? What are they really doing? Because who's buying jewelry in May of 2020? You know,
Right.
so it's behavior monitoring. That would be a really critical proactive piece. And watch decline rates too. If you have a merchant with elevated decline rates that's inexplicable and doesn't really make sense for the business model, it might prompt you to dig a little deeper and see what else is going on under the hood there.
Yeah, those are keys right there. Absolutely. The people that were buying jewelry in May of 2020 were doing chargebacks on that jewelry in July and August of 2020.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and that's why, you know, the brand rules have sections about monitoring and what is the minimum that has to be done. So, you know, the brands realize that you can't hold everybody globally to the same standard. So they put in minimum standards, minimum rules. So, you know, going to the MasterCard security rules and procedures manual and looking at, for example, in Chapter 6, you find your issuing monitoring requirements. You'll find or minimum standards. You'll find your acquirer minimum standards. Now, all of them don't apply in every scenario, but at least be familiar with them, because once you start looking at things that way, you will broaden your scope of transactions that are going to come into your purview. So you're not looking at the same thing every. You know, I used to go to shops when I was at the brand, and the risk people would say, all right, so for the first 5 minutes, we're just going to go through. These guys have been on, you know, they've been on with us forever. They show up every day. And my response was always, then why are you looking at them? If they're long established customers, not to say they can't go off the rails, but raise their parameters up a little bit so you're not getting bogged down in false positives, because it's just human nature. You know, we want to take the path of least resistance. And if you're looking at, if you have 300 in your queue and 150 are merchants that were there before you started your job, well, guess what? You need to reallocate your parameters there and let those really, really good merchants do their thing. Yes, keep monitoring them, keep looking at them, but only when they get up to an elevated level. Excessive declines, excessive returns, excessive chargebacks, but really look after the ones that are kind of in the middle between brand new and, let's say, you know, 12 to 18 months old-ish. Again, that's just, you know, me speaking. I'm not making any play there. So, but I think that's really what helps you proactively find these non-obvious red flags.
Yeah, and that kind of points back to the know the problem you're trying to solve. Don't just try to solve problems for the sake of solving problems. You need to understand what the problem is, and then what data sets do you need to be able to get there.
Yeah, 100%.
And Shari, thank you again for segueing into the next topic of conversation, because as we're preparing,
she's really good. She's really good at this.
It's amazing. It might be the most impressive thing so far. Is she just keeps leading me right down this path. As we're preparing for the session, we were talked about, what are the key takeaways, and landed on the importance of staying off the radar of the card brands. So, wrapping up this conversation before we jump into some questions, what would you hope are some key takeaways folks who attended are leaving this conversation with?
Be careful. There are cascading consequences of irreversible actions. You can't unring a bell.
Absolutely. Unring the bell, put the toothpaste back in the tube. And also take a half a step back and look at the landscape. Okay. It may look great. And salespeople always paint it as it is an amazing opportunity. We're never going to get this opportunity again. This is it. We're going to do X, Y, Z. Make sure that you are in contact with those groups at the start of the campaign, so that when or if there are pitfalls, you can bring it to their attention and work with them and work through it and let them know it's not a no. Maybe it's a yes, if. Yes, we could do this if we do X, Y, Z. As a lot of people say, "Oh, you're in compliance. You love to say no." Actually, no, I hate to say no, because when I say no, that means we're not doing business. But I would rather say yes if we're able to kind of button things up a little bit, and understanding the tolerances, not risk tolerance, not only of our organization, but also our sponsoring banks and our the card brands, and where this business or entity opportunity is globally. Is it in the US where I have to follow certain rules, or is it outside where I have to follow different rules, country rules, etc., laws, as as Shari mentioned before? So really just take a breath, take a half a step, and just look before you leave, or you're going to wind up like that guy walking across the ladder. I've seen that slide. I don't know how many times. Every time I see it, I get a little queasy. Okay, so just saying.
And I think the other key takeaway for this would be, don't let yourself be beholden to anyone. You need to be responsible for understanding the rules and when they change. You cannot hold yourself accountable to someone else to know for you. You have to know.
Correct.
If you miss a bulletin, if you miss a publication, right? Payment network rules are published every 6 months-ish. Mm-hmm. If there's a change, usually they announce it, but what if they don't? Did you miss it? Mm-hmm. You're still responsible to make sure that everyone that is contracted with you is in compliance with those rules, not just yourself. It's sort of a trickle down process. So make sure that you are not beholden to anyone but yourself to be aware of what those rules are. Same with state to state rules, laws. See, I did it too. I mixed up rules and laws. Payment network rules, state and federal laws. But make sure you're aware. If you need to have legal counsel review laws for interpretation, you should do that. But don't be beholden to other people to tell you they exist.
Correct.
Wonderful.
Correct.
And we're at that point in this discussion where we're going to open it up to some questions. And we've actually got a couple really good ones that I want to pose to you guys first off. So the first question is, where should the balance be between reliable KYC of our merchant and optimization that will lead to the merchant not resigning from cooperation with us as a processor?
That is a good question.
It is a good question. That's a very interesting line because not everybody walks the same line. So ABC company says, well, we need these 5 things. And XYZ company goes, we only need 3. Really, it's very, very difficult. I would say, do not skimp, do not lower your standard. Keep your standard high. You may not win all the business, but the business you will win will be worth it. People that want to take the, like I said before, people are like water. They want to take the path of least resistance. If you give them that opportunity and word gets out that you are the easy shop, guess what? Bad guys are going to target you, and your easiness or less due diligence is going to cause more loss, more aggravation in the end. Sherry, what do you think?
Agreed. I agree with you. And I think there's no minimum requirement, right? It's if you want to get through KYC, you don't stop until you're comfortable that you understand who your merchant is. And if you don't, you keep going, you keep digging. And I recognize that kind of goes against the flow of frictionless underwriting. But the reality is that you're owning that risk. And, is it worth it to you to sign this merchant who's going to make you probably pennies to the dollar, when the reality is if you do it wrong, it's going to cost you tens of thousands or more.
Absolutely.
And just as a reminder to all the people listening in, please feel free to toss the questions into the chat and I'll ask David and Shari. Another one we have here, if as a payment processor, we participate only in part of our partner's transaction, and he also has another part of his business, should we also be interested in this part during AML verification or only the part in which we participate?
I would care the whole way through.
Yeah, I would
because
too.
if a merchant is going to go sour on you, they're not going to go sour on you through one channel. That's going to be a through and through. So you're going to want to know.
Agree.
Okay, another one we got here. From a BSA AML program, do you recommend a BIN sponsorship payment processor conduct an independent audit?
Well, if you have a BIN sponsor, it's likely a financial institution or backed by a financial institution. They do go through many audits, I assure you, they do. Vigorous ones, external and internal. Whether you know it or not, they are auditing.
Yes, and the customers, capital C's, have an obligation to review and audit their downstream partners as well. So the brands do it, the customers do it, and even third parties should be doing it on their sales group or sales teams or entities that they're doing business with. Not just signing them up and letting them roll, going out and seeing them and having those conversations with them of who else are you providing merchants to, and which merchants are you providing to me? Am I getting your A paper, or am I getting, after 3 turndowns paper? Because that's really, that's another of the factors back into that those ticking time bombs and everything, right? Am I getting your, 750 and above credit people, or am I getting your, I'm getting the 400 to 500 credit people? All factors in.
And, also this goes back to don't be beholden to anyone else. Don't rely on your sponsor bank or your BIN sponsor to do the auditing for you. Nothing precludes you from having a QC process of your own. That wouldn't hurt at all in proactively identifying red flags.
Then we also got, what is an MMSP? So Shari, I'll let you, or David, I'll let you answer that one.
Merchant monitoring service provider. So if you go to the rules, the MasterCard rules, for example, you will find, I can't tell you which chapter and verse off the top of my head. I want to say 5, maybe. Chapter 5, could be wrong. It's been a while since I've been gone. But it'll tell you
Change every 6 months.
We'll change exactly. MMSP is listed in there. It tells you if you are using one and you want mitigation for assessments for non-compliance, they need to be registered. It's really, really easy to register them because every known MMSP is already registered. So it's just going in and just adding them to the registration. Very easy.
And then
there are a few on the market, though. G2RS is a good one. Shameless plug.
I'm biased. I agree with you.
G2RS, I've heard of them. I'm not sure from where, but yes, I've heard of them.
And then one more question. What is the most important information to retrieve from a merchant to perform a solid KYC check? Which information sources do you both advise to integrate to complement with external information?
I am not a lawyer. I do not purport to be a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, but all of it.
Yeah.
Beneficial ownership, financial background, driver's licenses, banking information, bank statements,
Credit.
And make sure the bank statements make sense, because you know, AI can forge these bank statements, but what it can't forge is the dollar amount. So if the dollar amounts don't make sense to you, that is a huge red flag. AI is not good at that. So keep an eye on that. You want to check match, see if other acquirers have had problems with this, or even APP alerts. If another acquirer has had an issue with this merchant, you want to know about it. So make sure you're doing your scrubs. OFAC sanctions are super important. I don't think that there's any aspect of BSA AML in that KYC process that I would say is more important than another. They all hold their own value, and there is no one piece that's more critical than another.
I would agree. The more the merrier. PEP and sanctions, you know, OFAC, all of them. Match is usually a good place to start, because if they're on Match, they're listed on Match, and your acquirer says we are not going to allow a merchant to process that is on Match, then guess what? You don't have to spend any more money in that one inquiry. You're done.
Yeah.
Put it on the top of your
And
list.
I would say APP alerts also, because if something doesn't meet the criteria for Match, they may be a nefarious actor and they can't be on Match because they just don't meet the threshold. But you find them on the APP alerts.
1-2. That would be my 1-2 punch. And then everything else, then just throw the kitchen sink at them. And keep digging. If you are unsure, keep digging. And if you get to the point where you don't get the information back that makes you comfortable, you look at them and say, no, can't do it.
Yes. If you have to ask, it's probably a no. Right? Trust the spidey senses, because they're usually right.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, I don't have much, but when it stands up on the back of my head, I know thumbs up. And these people, this group, this merchant, whatever it is. Now, look, it's been a long time since I've done direct underwriting. But I do get involved and have been involved with processes of how to streamline underwriting and how to make it more beneficial what you're looking at. So yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. So we are at time for the conversation. We're going to wrap this up. First off, thank you, Sean and David. Thank you for taking the time and joining me today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us directly or contact our marketing team at marketing@g2risksolutions.com. If you're interested in learning more about our boarding and monitoring solutions here at G2 Risk Solutions, please visit the Handouts tab, or you will be able to find both a recording of the session and all materials on our website in the resources section. And then if you're interested in learning more about how G2 Risk Solutions can help you, please visit our website or fill out the contact us form. And that concludes our session today. Again, huge thank you to Shar and David for sharing their experience with us. And also thanks to all of you for attending. Hoping everyone has a wonderful Tuesday.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Will, for having us. Take care.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.